All right. Well, hello, everybody. So, Brendan and I are back at it again. We were having a conversation recently about how this Easter season seems so different given all the circumstances, and how it poses challenges, not only just kind of practical challenges for our life, but really kind of spiritual challenges for how we engage our faith, especially during this high season of Holy Week coming up and Easter. So we thought we'd kind of have a conversation a little bit more deeply about kind of the challenges that we're facing, and kind of maybe practical ways that we can still enter more fully into the season of Easter, with the joy that comes with the season of Easter, and kind of still be a resurrection people in the confines of our own kind of self isolation. So, Brendan, looking forward to our conversation. So maybe we'll just start off by having you share a little bit, kind of what's been on your mind and heart as the season of Easter approaches, and what have you been thinking in terms of how we can engage it more fully?
Well, I think first it's kind of a surreal kind of feeling in terms of like I just thought earlier today. I mean, that next week is Holy Week, and it's like I can't believe it's Holy Week, and that just might be because things sneak up on you, but even more so during this time where we're just in isolation and days are kind of blending together, so it's a little difficult to mark that time. And so, and not having the opportunity to actually go to mass, especially for me, the Triduum, I really enjoy having all those liturgies and experiencing that. And so that's kind of my feeling toward it. But I think there's also an invitation to I would say kind of personalize the liturgy and the Easter time a little bit more. It's a little bit more like what the apostles did, like that they were in their own homes
Mm-hmm.
when Jesus appeared to them and came to them, and they had that Easter joy um, in smaller communities. And I think that while there's a challenge that we can't celebrate as a universal church, there is an invitation to celebrate as a domestic church, or to kind of carry that Easter joy in a smaller space.
Yeah, it's so weird. Just all the little things that we take for granted. Like, not only like this Palm Sunday, we're not going to be able to go to Mass and celebrate Mass, but like I'm not even going to get my palms, like, and I have palms up year round around my house, and now like my crucifix is just going to be a crucifix with no palms behind it, like, which is a relatively small thing, but it's also like a beautiful thing that like marks the entire year now with like this beginning and ending with Easter. And even the Triduum, and trying to think of like as a dad, there's a certain sense of now, um, it forces me to take a more creativity, like you mentioned, and a little more ownership of saying, how do I engage my family in the importance still of these days without just saying, well, we'll just go to church and the church will handle it. And obviously, there's a privileged kind of experience that we have of liturgy when we go to the church, but it's not as though God is only exclusively present there, like that God can only act when we're in the church buildings, and we can only celebrate these things if we're doing so in the confines of those four walls. But it is hard. I mean, it's like it's challenging, and a little bit like depressing to think like, man, like it's just not going to be the same. And are we just gonna kind of just kind of go half speed through Easter and not really get the fullness of it, or
Well, like when I first started thinking about this, I was reminded there's in the spiritual exercises there's this one meditation that you do during the Holy Week. It's called the longest Sabbath, and it's where you enter into the period of Holy Saturday, where everybody thinks Jesus is dead, and just the depression of that and the loss of that, because they don't know that the resurrection is coming. The only
right?
one that really kind of has that hope is Mary, who kind of knows that this is not the end. Um, and so at first I was thinking, well, this kind of feels like the longest Sabbath. It feels like Lent is extended, but I'm like, no, that's the wrong way to think about this. Lent doesn't continue. Yes, there's a natural depression that we have from staying in quarantine, but Jesus is still risen. Jesus is still alive, and Easter has come, and the message of being a resurrection people is that we live that regardless of what the circumstances in life at the current moment is that because it's the promise of the resurrection. It's the promise that when Jesus from the cross and the empty tomb has defeated death. So we know that COVID-19 has been defeated. We know that this is going to end at some point because Jesus has already won. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think that that's the invitation to not continue Lent, not continue the Sabbath, but to enter into the resurrection.
Yeah, and I think to realize that this, our present experience doesn't change the truths of reality, right? So our present experience of not being able to celebrate Easter as we might want to doesn't change the fact that Jesus is risen. And even the fact that Jesus is risen means that everything's different now. Like even COVID-19 is different now because Jesus is risen than it would be had Jesus not risen, right? Like our
Yeah.
experience of everything is simply different because we know that this is not the end of the story, that our quarantine is not the end of the story, that death itself is not the end of the story. And so the trick is, I really like the way you put that to realize that something changed on Easter and something still is going to change this Easter, right? Like something should change in our
Yeah.
minds and in our hearts. And so our quarantine should look different post Easter than it does, pre-Easter. The question is like, how do we do that? How do we make Easter look different, but also like feel different internally? How do we remember that joy? How do we remember that victory, even when all signs seem to point to the obvious or the contrary?
Yeah, that's really the question. But I think if we can do it, and obviously it's kind of strange to think about witnessing to the outside world when we're cut off from the outside world. But I think if Christians really show a celebration of Easter in this time of quarantine, um, that's going to be a tremendous witness to the resurrection. And I think one, there is just a sense of just willing it, like just actually entering into that mindset, not letting the depression feelings take a hold of you, to push those out and to live that. Like I've just been rereading the Chronicles of Narnia, and in Prince Caspian, they have this thing where like Lucy sees Aslan, who's Jesus, and she believes that it's him, but nobody else believes that she saw him. And especially Susan is like really adamant that Aslan wasn't there. And once they actually all see him, she's like, I really did believe that he was there. I really thought I saw him, and I believed Lucy, but I just wanted to get out of the wood. I wanted to get out of this place that we were in. And Aslan says to her, you listen to your fears, and instead of believing in me. And so I think we choose in some ways to believe in our fears, and so I think in one sense we have to actually choose to enter into the resurrection.
Right, right. And remember that our what appears to be true doesn't always change what is in fact true, right? That our understanding of a circumstance or a situation doesn't define reality. And even, I thought of this one time, that we have a tendency to think of like our present moment as defining the meaning and purpose of the world, right? If you think about it, like the continuum of time itself, that we're trying to use a particular point in time to give meaning to the entire spectrum of time, and so to kind of I think that this experience right now is changing everything. It's unraveling everything that we know to be true about God, about His relationship with us, about His commitment to us, about His providence. It's kind of crazy to think about that we would let this local moment define the purpose of time as a whole. That being said, I don't think we should trivialize the challenges that people face right now. I mean, this is a dark time, kind of for us as a nation, as a world, and it has real challenges with it. And I think, as we've talked about before, the goal is not to say, well, we would just pretend those challenges aren't there. No, it's to
No.
look them squarely in the face, but then also always remember that Jesus has conquered them, that there is no challenge that Jesus can't face and that He can't overcome, and that He has in fact already not overcome.
Yeah, and I think that like any journey in the spiritual life is like avoiding the two extremes of this overwhelming optimism that says that I enter denial and I deny that anything is actually happening, or I enter into this overwhelming pessimism that says, we are in the apocalypse and the world is coming to an end, and
Right.
and nothing will ever be the same again. And yes, there is some truth to that. That there is some sort of there is a change, like that there this moment has changed things, but it hasn't changed the resurrection. It hasn't changed Christ. Christ has changed all situations.
Right,
And
right.
so I think that um, by avoiding those two things, don't say that nothing has happened, but also don't say that everything has changed.
Right, right. And so I think if we're to think then of what we can actually do, like practically to like tap into that joy, I'm thinking, for example, we sometimes forget that Easter is an entire season. We tend to think that like the world that we celebrate Easter and then we let Easter go behind us and we move on with the rest of life. We fast for 40 days during Lent, but we celebrate for even longer, right? Like our celebration of Easter is longer. So like not only ought we to celebrate, like there's like a moral obligation to celebrate during Easter. So like
Yeah.
have dessert twice a day during Easter, right? Like go all out because this is a time of rejoicing, this time of celebrating. And so I think little things like that we can still try to do things that are celebratory, even if it means doing something different, going and having dinner out in the backyard, a picnic on the grass rather than in the house. So just to do something different that's a little bit more celebratory, getting out tablecloths and setting the dinner table with tablecloths and these types of things to remind ourselves. I mean, that's what we are as a sacramental people, right? We have these tangible signs and symbols that point us to deeper realities. And I think anything we can do during the season of Easter to remind ourselves that this is a time to rejoice and that our rejoicing will not only have an effect on us, but it can be a witness in the world. And I think, people have been talking about putting chalk, drawings and writings on your sidewalk. Like, why aren't we writing? Like, Jesus has got this. Jesus is risen, right? The world is different now. Have hope. Believe in the Lord. As you say, I think there's great opportunities for witnessing. And you brought up an interesting point when we were talking before of those who might go to mass only on Christmas and Easter. They might really realize for the first time that they crave going to mass on Easter during this time, and perhaps that craving is a good thing for them to realize, like, even though it's only twice a year, I miss going this one time, a year. And how can we engage those people and kind of bear witness to again the joy of Easter and the opportunity to celebrate.
Yeah, and I think that that's the phrase you don't know what you got until it's gone. And I think that that's what we're all kind of experiencing. And I think that especially for those that maybe have not um taken it, I think we all take for granted the graces that we are given by God. But even those that haven't really thought about it. And I think it's a time to a little bit more um enter into deeper prayer, like the whole octave of Easter, of the Easter Monday, Easter Tuesday, Easter, all of these days are Easter. And because we're home and we're locked in some ways, we can actually take those days and maybe do more prayer, do more, not in the penitential prayers that we've been doing during this Lent, but in a celebratory prayer, to go out into nature and enjoy that and enter into, because we're experiencing spring weather right now. We're experiencing resurrection weather. Um, and so there's still opportunities, and to, you know, really make that. I think it requires a little bit more effort, but I think but I think it's gonna God will not be outdone in generosity. If
Yeah,
if we give him a little extra, he'll give us way more extra.
right. I think too that many of us are thinking of this right now in terms of our own cravings and longings and what we're missing. But I think this provides us like a privileged opportunity to turn outward and be mindful of others. Like we know what we're missing. Like we know what we want, we're not able to have. There's tons of people that ultimately need and want Jesus. They just don't know it. And they might not even thinking of the fact that people aren't able to go to church anymore. They might even think, well, good for them. They don't have to go to church anymore. But in reality, this could help us be mindful, I think, of this, what we love so much and we hold so deeply. Are we as motivated for our own attainment of those things as we are of bringing that to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
Are we trying to foster a hunger in others for what they truly crave and what they truly desire? And so this could be an opportunity for us to maybe shift our mentality, even in terms of our faith. That our faith, yes, it's deeply personal, and God knows us and loves us and wants to transform us personally, but He always wants to turn us outward. He always wants us to receive so that we can give, right? And I think this could call us to a greater attention or mindfulness of that.
And I think that like two biblical images that have come to mind in terms of that is when when Jesus rose from the dead and he came to the apostles, I mean, they were staying in Jerusalem, they were staying in the upper room all the way up until Pentecost. And so they were keeping this Easter joy that they had. It was kind of building within themselves during that time. And then when Pentecost came, that's when they brought it out to the world. And in the same way, it's like Noah's Ark, where all of the animals and all of the life and all of creation was kept inside the ark, so that when the flood was over, that life could go out and transform the world. And so I think the more we enter into that Easter joy and the more that we build it up during the time that we're still in quarantine, we can come and bring that out. And one, everybody's going to be joyful once this quarantine ends. So there's going to be a natural joy. But if we can add on top of that, that Easter joy that we've been, obviously spreading through social media and other means while we're here, but even more so when we can actually go out and talk to people in person, we can take that joy and share it and say this was what got me through
Mm-hmm.
this difficult time, was the faith that I have in Christ
Yeah.
and his resurrection. And I'm now want to share it with you because I know what it's like to not have him, at least in a sacramental form. And so I want you to have him in that form in every way, so that you have him more. Just I know what you've been missing, because
Yeah.
I've been missing that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Those are great biblical images. Well, hey, this is a been a fun conversation, and obviously, we don't presume to have all the answers. I think we're in this with everybody else. Like we have our own uh, struggles and the way we're wrestling through these challenges. And so, we just want you guys to know that the staff is in this with you. That we're praying for you guys. That you guys are always on our minds and our hearts, and we're trying to think of ways in which we can try to keep that joy alive and keep that fire going, both for each other as well as for the world that's maybe struggling during this time. So we wish you a very blessed and happy end of your Lenten season and truly a joy-filled Easter. So God bless you all.